Do you believe, though, that, Arthur, the U.S. consumer has been so strong forever that we will look past this? It's a dramatic, terrible, and important time in American history, but that in a year, 2, 3 years from now, the American economy will look past this and will recover?
Well, the economy will definitely recover, but what is the new normal, I think, is the question we're all asking ourselves at this point. I think there's a very permanent shift going on in channel behavior on the part of the consumer. The lockdown has taught consumers they can satisfy both their needs and their wants through online commerce. And what we've seen here, I think, in the last 2 or 3 months is 2 or 3 years worth of accelerated adoption of online as a channel, which has major implication for bricks and mortar retailers. Stores become somewhat less relevant, store productivity becomes smaller, store profitability shrinks, and in some cases disappears. And so the change here will not be the attitude of the American consumer, but the channel choices that they make.
Sure, but there could be a short-term pop, perhaps. Speaking with other executives and business owners, both on air and off the air, Arthur, we've all been cooped up, some of us more than others in various parts of the country, and there is a feeling, perhaps, and I made a bet on Twitter with a friend of mine about restaurant reservations booming again once we can actually go do that, and I'm on the optimistic side, by the way. Americans have been cooped up for a long time. There's got to be some kind of initial pop for brick and mortar, assuming people feel safe to go out, don't you think? We want to get out of the house, Arthur.
Yes, they do, and I do too. But I think what we're going to see is a very short-term pop, and it will revert, I think, to a more cautious consumer who's not quite as profligate, shall we say, with their financial resources as they were leading up to this terrible crisis with the pandemic and now with the protests. There will be a short-term behavioral pop. I agree with you on that. But I think there's going to be a time of reset for the American consumer, understanding they might be able to get along with a little bit less than they used to. Keeping up with the Joneses won't be quite the mantra that it used to be. I won't call it a new frugality necessarily permanently, but it'll be a shorter pop and then a more gradual rebuild to that new normal.
Sure, but one of the things that we've talked about, Arthur, is income inequality. But you can't pay somebody a fair wage, a living wage, if you don't have any profit, or at least don't have a higher profit margins. For decades now, Americans have been driven by this idea of cheap. Got to fill up the cart with the cheapest stuff we can. In part, some people have to do that because their incomes have fallen, but their incomes may have fallen because they lost their job at the factory, which is now in China, to make the cheap stuff that is now on the shelves at the store they're buying. Do you think Americans would be willing to pay a little more to buy something that is either made in the United States or at least in a fair wage nation?
Well, I think your last comment is the one that matters, a fair wage nation, one that isn't seen to be exploiting its workers for their own economic gains. There'll be a reset of the table here, I think, in terms of the supply chain, both for the logistical issues and also for the economics of the product. There's no question that the American consumer will respond somewhat better to a made in America. But at the end of the day, pocketbook is what determines how people spend their money. And until something is done about the drastic income inequality in this country, to give people a living wage, to buy what they need and satisfy their family's needs, and forget the wants for a moment, just their needs, until we solve the income equality problem, we're not going to solve a bigger problem.